Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Sparagi. The New York Knicks have missed the playoffs 8 of the last 9 seasons. So is this the year they finally turn things around in the Big Apple? For a preview, let's welcome in Howard Beck, who covers the team for the New York Times. And Howard, after years of clearing cap space for LeBron James, the Knicks wind up with Amari Stoudemire. Is that enough to get the fans fired up at Madison Square Garden?
Yeah, you may be surprised, but actually it is. They're very fired up. I mean, there was clearly some letdown in July when LeBron chose Miami, but the fans recovered here pretty quickly, and the Knicks recovered pretty quickly. Amari Stoudemire can't transform a franchise overnight the way that LeBron James can, but this is the first legitimate star player, superstar-type player, that they've had here in a long time, since Patrick Ewing was in his prime. I mean, all they've seen in this market for the last 10 years is a series of fake franchise players, Stephon Marbury and Steve Francis and Eddie Curry, Zach Randolph, all these guys who were advertised as the answer, as a foundation, and none of them were. And for the first time in a long time, they've got a legit star here. Amari's not just one of the best power forwards, one of the best big men in the league. He's one of the best players in the league, and he's a guy you can build around. Now, do they have enough around him? That remains to be seen, and there's a lot of question marks around that. But this guy is going to bring the Garden alive every night. He's going to excite the fans, and he's going to give them a legitimate shot to finally break that playoff drought this season.
And I know Stoudemire is excited to be in New York. Howard, it's no secret that Carmelo Anthony and Chris Paul would like to play in New York sooner or later. What are the chances of the Knicks creating their own super team in the next few years?
It's a really tricky proposition because, first of all, Chris Paul has seemingly kind of settled down now in New Orleans. They've got a whole new management team there, and obviously they're committed to keeping him. And they, at least publicly, it seems they've assuaged some of his concerns. And they traded Darren Collison, the guy who presumably would replace him if you trade Chris Paul. So by doing that, they're kind of showing, they're signaling, look, we're married to Chris Paul. We're not ready to turn this over to another point guard. We're trading the one guy who could replace him. So, and he's under contract until 2012. So that's not, there's no real urgency there, and there's no reason to think that would happen immediately. Carmelo Anthony, different story, but again, Denver, if they want to, they can simply hold on until the end of the season, hope that he, somehow finds some happiness along the way, or that they make another move that makes them a better team, that makes them feel like they do have a promising future. And, no one knows what's going to happen next summer with regard to the CBA. So the rules could change, and, you don't know what your ability to sign a guy might be or what salary cap situations are going to be. All the Knicks can do is plan for it. They have planned for cap space next summer, and if Carmelo Anthony has not been traded and signed an extension with somebody else by then, the Knicks will be chasing Carmelo Anthony next summer. But again, we don't know really what the cap space situation is because the whole system could change. But they've put themselves in position, and that's the other thing about this summer. They not only went out and got Amari Stoudemire and got Raymond Felton and Roger Mason and a bunch of other guys who have upgraded their talent level, they also left themselves some wiggle room, assuming that the system and that the CBA is at least somewhat similar in the future. And, again, at some point, maybe a guy does force a trade, whether it's Carmelo or Chris Paul or someone else.
Well, if Carmelo does make his way to New York, that would make quite a 1-2 punch. What's it going to take, though, for the Knicks to make the playoffs this season?
Well, it's going to take several things. The first is that Raymond Felton, who's their new starting point guard, and again, best point guard they've had here in quite a while, he's got to get acclimated to Mike D'Antoni's system. In the first couple of exhibition games, he seemed to be, I don't know if it was passive or just a little hesitant, but he really needs to be an assertive point guard. I mean, we saw in Phoenix with Steve Nash, and Raymond Felton, of course, is not Steve Nash, but you do need a very assertive point guard. You've got to kind of move that ball with a purpose, whether that's going to be, running the pick and roll, passing it, shooting it, penetrating. He's got to be a very active guy in this offense, and he's got to become a great pick-and-roll partner with Amari Stoudemire for both of them to flourish. And then from there, it's about their young players, Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari. These are both guys who have shown tremendous promise the last couple of years, have made great strides, and the question is whether they're ready to step up into a role where they're going to be a night-in, night-out dependable scorer for this team. And Gallinari has, this team believes, and I believe too, having seen him the last couple of years, I think Gallinari has some star potential, and he's still only 22. Can he make that leap immediately? Is it going to be another year? And then there's a question of, do they have enough shooting in general? Because for Amari Stoudemire to be a really effective player down low, they're going to need Roger Mason and Gallinari and Chandler and the rest of these guys to make those outside shots. So some of these guys have a checkered history. Mason's had, one pretty good season. Raymond Felton had, one good year last year in terms of shooting. They need consistency on the perimeter for this team to be good. And then, there's always the question of defense, but they hope they'll get that where they need it.
All right, so there are some question marks, but still high hopes for the Knicks this season. Howard, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate your time. And don't forget, foxsports.com as you covered for all your basketball needs. I'm Randy Spiraghi. Thanks for looking in.